r/AskReddit. What the fastest way you've seen someone ruin their life? I had a friend in college who had a tendency to act before thinking, but was generally fun and well-meaning. After I had graduated, my friend apparently got coerced by a woman he was trying to sleep with to try heroin just once. As I heard it, he refused initially, then caved because he felt pressured. My friend overdosed and died. Just like that, one bad decision ended his life. R.I.P. Mike. I recently found a good friend of mine passed away in my spare bedroom when he came to visit from New Zealand. He had scored some drugs off the street and was doing needles. I was in such shock when he just pulled out the needle and proceeded to do drugs all day. Later in the evening I was sitting on my couch and he said he was cold, so I turned on the heater and closed the door as he was laying in bed. I woke up early the next morning to check on him and he was gone. This whole year has been one hell of a ride. My sister is coming to live with me this weekend. She's a recovering addict, but relapses every 6 months or so. This is my biggest fear. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect this to blow up. First, thank you all for your support and advice. Second, I will absolutely get my hands on a couple Narcan kits. It's brought her back a few times before, and I know she has at least one, but I'll have a couple for the house and car. I'm well aware that she won't be able to administer it herself. To answer some questions, yes, she has been through the recovery process a number of times, including inpatient rehab and IARP, and she goes to regular meetings, which she says work for her. Moving up here, the first priority is find a meeting she likes and get a sponsor. After that, she needs to get a job doing literally anything but working in the service industry. That has been the worst environment for her because her real drug of choice is speedballing, and a lot of kitchen staff do cocaine. I also want to get her into therapy. As far as my stuff, she lived with my dad when she was an active heavy user, and he has way nicer stuff that never went missing. She also lived on the streets of Philly, Kensington, with my mom's 2K engagement ring, and she still wears it every day. She has had every opportunity to fuck us over, but she has never stolen anything from family. She also doesn't feel comfortable bringing people she meets at meetings over for that reason. She was on Suboxone, but wants to get off because she doesn't want to meet the people who use subs when she moves up here. She's aware this process will suck. Hopefully I've answered everyone's questions and quelled your fears about Narcan. A former acquaintance was playing around with a homemade crossbow that I'd helped him with. I was massively into archery and fletching, and he seemed serious about it. I typically made him leave it with me because deadly weapon. I have an explanation. He kinda didn't. Anyway, to convince his parents to let him join an archery club, he wanted to show off the crossbow we made. I thought it was a decent plan, so let him take it without any ammo. Turns out he was gaming me to get more playtime with his favorite toy, had gotten hold of some bolts, and was fucking around shooting his shed a fair bit. He somehow ended up firing a bolt that missed the shed completely, passed between the slats on his fence, and hit his neighbor's daughter in the spine. She hasn't walked since. He got fucked up real bad by her unstable older brother. They both did jail time. Acquaintance was disowned and ended up homeless, and now I'm not sure where they are in life. Edit. I've had a few people comment that even a stable person would want to fuck up someone for something like this. Truth told, I half agree. I still feel like it's important information to the situation. However, and just want to qualify the statement. The beating he got was brutal, involved a crowbar, and left him with a broken femur. The difference between wanting to do something like that and actually acting on it is important. Also, we were 18 at the time. The girl was 12, her brother 21. For all those asking. Edit 2. The brother had a history of anger management issues and drug abuse, and a small list of prior misdemeanors. This man isn't someone you should be elevating, just because his negativity was concentrated on someone who you say deserved it. I'm not here to argue about the ethics of his actions, or whether or not his instability was a factor in his reaction. It was. Stable people don't find revelry in inflicting grievous bodily harm on others. To wrongs, eye for an eye, and all that. Went to school with a kid who threw a rock off an overpass and killed a dude. Whole life down the drain at that point. Made international news. Edit. Flint, Michigan. Imagine being the dude that got hit. Just living your life, driving home from work one secretary and literally dead the next. This life is something else. About 50 years ago, when my great uncle was in his early 20s, he drove home so drunk that he ran over and killed 2 college students and didn't even realize it. After his initial incarceration, he didn't know how to function as a free citizen, so he keeps getting himself sent back to jail. For example, he got out of jail around a year ago and couldn't make his first month's rent. His solution was to walk to the convenience store, steal a beer, and sit on the curb waiting for the cops to arrive. I had a friend years back, always kind of an odd guy, but he had a good heart. Anyway, one day, I was hanging out with him and a few other friends, and he told us he was going to get a tattoo tomorrow, and had this super cool idea, but he wouldn't tell us what it was, because he wanted it to be a surprise. We saw him about a week later. He had tattooed 3/4s of his face green. Like, no design or anything, just solid dark forest green. Basically, he just left the top right quarter of his face normal and the rest was all green. He had been immediately fired from his job the day after getting the tattoo. I kind of lost touch with him shortly after that, since he moved to another city. I'd heard he wound up living in his car. No idea why he did what he did. He'd had a very good job in it at a pretty big company and was making decent money. No clue why he thought permanently turning 3/4 of his face green would be super awesome. Edit. Okay, my inbox kind of exploded overnight. I have no idea why he got fired. It was about 15 years ago, and the company he worked for seemed pretty stuffy. For all I know, maybe he actually quit and just told us he got fired. Maybe he'd gone in and did something crazy/inappropriate that he neglected to mention. No clue. As for the tattoo artist, I have no idea who did it. Again, for all I know, he paid some meth head to do it. I don't have any tattoos myself, so I'm really not an expert on the topic. I've got to think there are some unscrupulous artists out there who don't give a shit as long as they are getting paid, though. This is absolutely mental illness. A friend of mine seemed totally cool most of the time. I knew she had bipolar disorder, but she was fine on her meds. She stopped taking her meds and called me one night on the side of the road right after she cut all her hair off. I picked her up, gave her a buzz cut to even it out a bit, and called her therapist. She got back on her meds and has been fine for the last few years. If I hadn't known already about her mental illness, I would have been shocked by what she did. Yeah, that seems very likely. He wasn't a super close friend, and he was a few years older than us. We were just out of university, so we were still at an age where that sort of mattered. Ick now. So we had never really talked about that sort of stuff. It certainly wouldn't surprise me, though. I have quite a few friends with fairly severe mental illness and I've seen them do some pretty disturbing things. Dropped out of a very good college with a full scholarship that his family could never have afforded otherwise after 3 years due to World of Warcraft addiction. No, this wasn't me. I managed my addiction responsibly. Edit. We are thinking of different guys. The fact that dozens of replies are "Hey, I know this guy's disconcerting but not unexpected." Edit. I played WoW from release through Cataclysm, but never really had a problem walking away from it to focus on life, which is probably the experience of most of the player base. After I quit, I started having intrusive thoughts about relapsing, even 8 years later, but have never felt that I'd given to that. I was there when my older brother tried heroin for the first time. Fast forward 15 years, and he is constantly going to the hospital for abscesses that appear on his arms and legs, and is almost completely cut off from the rest of the family because he's robbed our parents more than once. Every few years he swears he is going to kick the habit. The first few times we collectively ponied up cash to send him to rehab and tried to be as supportive as we could. After the 10th relapse or so, we are too exhausted to even pretend to be hopeful about his newest attempt to get clean. Edit. Thanks for all of the positive feedback. Early 90s, my friend was a sweet theater nerd who went to the same college as me. She started hanging out with a sketchy crowd and ignoring her old friends, especially when we tried to tell her she was losing herself. She ended up moving to Seattle to hang with her new friends. Growing up, she was the most sober person in our group. She never even drank alcohol, much less did any drugs, but 6 months later, she was dead of a heroin overdose. One of my best childhood friends also died this way, but a bit more slowly. We hung out nearly every weekend from 2nd grade until 9th. In 9th grade, he really started to struggle with his image/identity. He had always been the class clown, but never really one of the cool kids. One day he showed up decked out in skater gear from Paxson and became friends with some junkies. He started using heroin and I stopped hanging out with him. A couple years later we reconnected. He had convinced everybody that he had beaten the addiction and was moving on with his life. During our college years, I went to a university about 45 minutes away and he started taking classes at a local community college. We would hang out on weekends sometimes, whenever I was in town. 7 years later he was still going to the community college and was perpetually 1 or 2 classes away from finally graduating. I ended up joining the Navy. A few years later I got a call that he had died in his sleep after a blood vessel burst in his brain. Apparently long-term heroin use sometimes results in such problems. Doctors discovered he had been using. Even though he could never get his shit together, he was actually a remarkably smart and genuinely interesting person. I never bothered him about his lack of ambition because I figured he was off of drugs and that was good enough. Now I'm pretty much middle-aged and I still miss him. In the Air Force, this new guy joins and goes out to a bar, then decides to drive home. Gets a DUI, loses all his rank, has to pay a ton in fines, but leadership fought for him and he was allowed to stay in the Air Force. 2 months later, as he's paying tons of lawyer and legal fees, he does something really stupid. Drives home from the same bar drunk and gets arrested. Loses his license and gets kicked out of the military, so loses all his income while he's thousands of dollars in debt. That's not even the worst part. A few months later, he celebrates being a civilian again by, you guessed it, going to the same bar, then driving home drunk. Arrested and put in jail for a while. I can't imagine he has many future career opportunities with a less than honorable discharge and an arrest record. Edit. I should have added that the third DUI included charges for driving without a license, since he had it suspended after the second.